Flashing lights come from everywhere. The way they hit, I have to stop and stare.
Do you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Sure.
Okay.
My name is Andy Comer. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Creative Services at Tommy Bahama. Came to the company about 3.5 years ago and entered as the Vice President of Creative. So I come from the creative side of the house. My background is primarily in media publishing. I started my career at America Online in the late 90s, so I sort of had exposure to some of the early days of digital content. I was there through the Time Warner merger, and then I went on to Condé Nast, where I was an editor at GQ for 7 years, did some agency work, and then kind of got back into fashion and retail.
Cool.
And I'm Ty Flandro, Tyson Flandro, but if you're yelling at me, it's easier to just yell Ty. I've been with the company for just a year. I just celebrated. It's all this tinfoil I have in my mouth.
It's the gravity of this conversation.
Been with the company for just 1 year. I'm actually a Seattle native. There's 3 of us that live in Seattle still that are from there. My background is a mix of agency and in-house. Spent time with Xbox, spent time with Nintendo, and spent time on the agency side. And most recently with an Expedia company called Hotwire before coming over to Tommy Bahama. My first stint in apparel.
Great.
1 year, and they haven't kicked me out yet.
Awesome.
We'll see how this goes, though.
That's a good start. Well, I'm right there with you.
Good.
So hopefully I
together.
can say the same 10 months from now. Anyway, I'm going out and starting to meet clients, and we started to have this conversation about brand and demand organically. It just kind of came up. And so I thought it'd be fun to sort of, not so much reenact it, but sort of hit some of the highlights. So, Andy, we had this conversation about like, the Tommy Bahama brand is extremely strong, right? So that was, you had the great benefit of showing up when someone had already clearly invested significantly in it. But how do you guys think about maintaining that balance? And how do you avoid the temptation of the, right curl bro, where you're going to end up down the click funnel?
It is a temptation.
Yeah.
I think some of that temptation is tempered by what's built into sort of the culture of our brand.
Right.
I'll talk a little bit about that. It started to get back to your, was it Moso bamboo?
Mm-hmm.
Was that the analogy? I have kind of an old-fashioned point of view that a brand is a living, breathing thing. It's something that requires nurturing over time. And I think that, that's not something that you can automate or code or, as you said, rationalize into existence.
Right?
It's something that requires an investment of time, an investment of energy, a vision, a mission, and patience. And I think our founders understood that, in the early 90s when they founded the brand.
Right.
They, three guys who had a background in retail sort of, set out to do this audacious thing, which was take this fantasy that they had of unplugging and relaxing and scaling that across, at first apparel, but now a whole lifestyle. And their vision and their mission sort of revolve around something that we still hold very dear today, which is this idea of we want to be the definitive island lifestyle brand. And the question becomes, well, what does that mean? For us, our brand proposition is to live the island life. And we adopted that about 3 years ago. We changed it from Make Life One Long Weekend, which my personal opinion was that sounded a bit like it could be an insurance company as well as and so we tried to make it a bit more ownable. And the question now becomes, well, how do you sort of build out this notion of what the island life is? How do you make it more inclusive? How do you make it more meaningful? If our founders were really intent on inspiring people to relax, we're sort of continuing that focus, but really trying to ask ourselves about, perception issues that we have. I mean, we do have a very strong brand. We have a very committed core following, and yet I would wager that probably close to 90% of the people in this room have a very specific impression of what it is that Tommy Bahama does, what it is that we stand for. And probably in most cases, it's not a positive one. There's a sort of a little bit of a cliched notion of who the Tommy Bahama customer is that we see reinforced in popular culture
Right.
over and over again. Recently, there was something on the TV series Veep, where Tommy Bahama was the butt of a pretty vulgar joke. Damn you, Julia Louise
I
Dreyfus.
know that
she's-
show is outstandingly funny.
Yes, but
Yeah.
I think to get back to
And in poor taste, obviously.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yes,
Oh, this is
exactly.
going-
Very poor
Now
taste.
we love it?
So, look, I mean, without being too long-winded, yes, it is tempting on a day-to-day basis to, sort of flip a switch and try to become a purely data-driven organization.
Right.
That's obviously easier said than done, and it's not necessarily something that we aspire to, because we believe in the power of that emotional connection with our guest.
Right.
It's something that we've built a $700 million brand on. And I think if you look at the trajectory of the company, we've sort of proven that out in spite of ourselves. I mean, we started as primarily a wholesale company selling apparel to third-party retailers like Nordstrom. That was 80-90% of our business until about 15 years ago. And then the founders did something totally audacious and just said, against everyone's advice, let's start going direct to guest. Let's open this massive store in Naples, Florida, because that's where we feel like our guest is. And by the way, let's also open a restaurant there.
Right.
What the hell are you doing? Well, they were sort of really going after this gambit that they made of being this authentic island lifestyle brand. And now today, we're like, where we were 80% wholesale, we're now 80% direct to guest.
Is that right? Wow.
About 25% of that is driven by e-commerce.
Sure.
20% of it is driven by restaurants. Brick and mortar is still a massive driver of that revenue. We'll talk a little bit maybe about experiential a bit more, but one of the things that we've really been working on is experiential extensions of our brand, because we really feel like that human, emotional, experiential connection with the experience of Tommy Bahama is where we're going to win.
Right.
And again, not to put too fine a point on that, but it's not really something you can automate.
Definitely not. Frankly, I'm really blown away by 20% from restaurant, right? So for an apparel brand to have a 20% of your revenue from restaurants is pretty incredible.
Well, people ask us too, who owns and operates your restaurants, and we say we do.
Yeah.
And they sort of ask, why?
Right.
And how did you ever start doing that? A lot of the decisions that we've made defy logic in a certain extent. But
Outside your comfort zone.
Exactly.
So
Really good answer.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Thanks, man.
Let's go and talk about. So one of the things that while we were setting this up, we said, "Oh, you know what, Craig, you're going to sit down with Tommy Bahama and you're going to have a fireside chat." And I said, first of all, there won't be a fire, and maybe for Tommy Bahama it would be like a fire pit on the beach might be more appropriate. But you guys were saying, well, actually, no, we have these things called jam sessions, and that came up out of the context of how the hell do you coordinate all these pieces? So if you want to expound on the jam session idea,
Yeah, and
it'd
it
be
sounded
great.
cooler, I think, when we said it before.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound
We
as
got to go
cool.
with it now. That's where we are.
okay.
So we are
yeah.
for a 40 and up demo. So
That's right. That's right. It is cool. Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of the question or the topic was how do we kind of keep the company together and moving forward, and sort of how do we hack maybe the system. And really, it kind of came down to we have standing every Tuesday, every Thursday, cross-functional group of people, and the meetings are standing. And it'll be creative reviews, it'll be project kickoff, it'll be sort of ongoing conversation, long-term, short-term, about where the company is. But really, from a creative standpoint, we'll sort of riff on either a project that's in flight right now. Does it still feel like it's landing the way we want it to? We'll talk about a brief for an upcoming project and kicking it off.
Right.
And what we will do in that room is sort of really just kind of roll around in the idea, and ultimately at the end of 60 minutes we walk out of there with either creative that is sort of morphed or been kicked off with the benefit of conversation. I think we've all, Andy and I definitely come from places where a creative brief will get hurled over from the marketing strategy team to the creative team. And then a certain number of weeks later, something comes back, and then you kind of go, no, it's all wrong, or we're seeing it differently,
Right.
And it just feels like really wasted time and frustration and friction. And so this sort of idea of getting everybody in the room has really been really beneficial for the whole team.
Yeah, our company culture is very unique in that, you know, just in terms of size, we're sort of big enough to have resources to actually invest in certain marketing levers and certain systems, but we're also small enough that, you know, if you're not constantly collaborating and reaching across the aisle, then you're failing, basically. You know, we're very much a culture of drive-bys and in-person conversations. That really starts with our CEO, Doug Wood, who operates that way. You know, you think about sort of hacking our org structure. You know, I won't sort of mince words. I mean, I think, you know, a decade ago, Tommy Bahama didn't really have a marketing function. And, you know, it was not ever a possibility for, you know, some titanic individual or some collection of overly egoed marketers to come in and sort of, you know, create that, because that would never fly. So the question always has to start in our culture with, how are you going to engage around our core business objectives? How are you going to add value as a marketer? And how are you going to sort of articulate a vision and then bring people along for the ride? And I think some of the organizational hacks that Ty's talking about have worked because we have a really aligned leadership team that, as a company, believes in the power and the value of marketing to grow our brand. Now, I think that's a two-way street. You know, we had to kind of earn that trust, and our way of earning that trust is opening the door, making ourselves a little bit vulnerable. You raised finance earlier, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but you know, when you think about KPIs and our database and everything, you know, we are far from a well-oiled machine, and so it would be very easy for us to kind of operate in a state of constant insecurity, especially around brand activity.
Right.
It's like, well, how the hell do you show that that's working? I mean, we're a comp sales business.
Right.
Our relationship with finance has kind of helped us mediate that a little bit, and a lot of it is just kind of, you talked about indirect or not direct answers that aren't direct.
Right.
A lot of that's just been in saying, you know what, in some cases, I don't have the answer, and I'm not going to sort of tap dance around it and try to pretend that I do. You know, one last thing I want to add about the brand demand thing quickly is that I was thinking about this a lot as Brigitte was presenting. You know, this notion of being hyper-targeted, right, in ways that could potentially even be offensive to you as an individual. For our brand, it just runs so contrary to the whole notion of relaxing, unplugging, sort of being your most authentic version of yourself. That's another thing that we've been very, very careful about is, I mean, the second we sort of open the floodgates and start doing that, we're basically eroding, we're beginning that fast erosion of our brand equity that, right or not, we feel like it is really the most important thing that we have.
Got it. How do you keep it going? So in my experience, I've been, you know, named to and part of, I don't know how many marketing integration task force things across clients, across agencies, across everything, and everyone shows up with the best of intentions on day one, and by day three, it's like, oh, sorry, I'm too busy. You know, I can't. I got to do this other thing.
Fortitude.
Yeah.
You know.
But is it you guys? Is it literally like, no, get your ass in here. We got to talk about what's going on? Or
often.
Okay.
Often.
Right.
I mean, was I saying no?
No, I think, you know, look, we have everything working in our favor because the reality is that when you're talking about growing a business, you're talking about marketing. And, you know, there is really no topic within our business that doesn't cross over into 3 or 4 different disciplines.
Right.
And so we're the first people to admit that our e-commerce team is doing marketing, our retail team is doing marketing, our finance team is doing marketing just like we are. So we really try to frame up the issues a bit more democratically and a bit more around, you know, and again, there's some vulnerability there, but it's an important leap, I think, to be able to say, hey, guys, and this is inclusive of our CEO, if all of us in our respective functions aren't aligned on exactly what it is that we stand for during a season or a half year or a full year, then none of us are going to win. And that's not just a marketing question. that's a brand building question that touches all areas of the business. And so I think, again, we benefit from having a very aligned core team. Is the value of marketing questioned? Of course it is.
Yeah.
Constantly. I mean, that's just sort of what you sign up for. But there is an absolute understanding of its importance to helping us turn the page collectively. And so for that reason, there's some wrangling.
Yeah.
But by and large, it's a natural kind of organic thing that happens.
Right.
And I think if that weren't happening, I'd already be out of a job, and knock on wood, I'd have at least a little bit longer in my tenure.
And I would get growth through attrition, which is really my plan.
Got it.
I think one of the key pieces to kind of build on that is we don't do it from a marketing standpoint. We don't do a lot of just unveils, right? So we don't sort of go behind the scenes and then come out and sort of ta-da and pull like this thing. Yeah, I sat next to the guy who had the button, and I was bummed that I didn't realize until after he didn't let me hit the button, which I think.
The Times Square thing?
Yeah. So next time.
Okay.
Yeah, the unveil doesn't work for us.
Yeah, we could actually do that for if you sign up for the app. You might be able to hit the button. Anyway.
So we don't do that, although I like it now. And I think part of keeping it moving and keeping everybody together is it is a process all the way through. And I think we've found success in not sort of unveiling things. I think making sure that finance and our CEO and head of sales, e-com, everybody's along for the ride all along, engaging and giving ideas. And I think what that does is it doesn't make it feel like all of a sudden upon unveil of an idea,
Right.
that they're suddenly committed to a yes or no. And I think in those situations, it's way easier to say no, to find fault or to find issue or to say, I'm not really sure I can commit to this.
Right.
What about some feedback? If we're completely open, and it does take some sort of confidence and vulnerability, I think is the right word. But I think we've found success in bringing everybody along for the ride, and it gets us buy-in early. And that's how I think we keep that we're able to sustain that, is everybody knows they're part of it.
And the culture of that is that it's really high touch and it's really hands-on. So I would say 60 to 70% of my day is spent physically walking over to cross-functional leaders or even inside marketing leaders' offices to talk about the 3 or 4 things that we need to address today. It's a place where you have to learn pretty quickly that you're not gonna succeed if you sort of retreat into whatever that area of Buffalo that you showed us.
Silo City.
Yes,
Beautiful.
yes,
It's
It's beautiful this time of year, actually. It's just, the ice is just going out.
Yeah.
We have a couple minutes left. If anyone has questions, I've got a couple more. I'm going to keep going, but please throw your hand up. We're happy to chat. The one other thing I wanted to ask about was when you guys are sitting with the CEO and the CFO, and how do you know it's working? What are you looking at? What kinds of data are you, when you get together with the CFO? And you mentioned comps. In retail, you got to talk about comps, obviously, but talk to us about those dimensions. What's important?
Yeah, I think truly I think we're sort of a tale of almost 2 very extremes. And I think on one half we have all of the great data that we get actually working with our team, with you guys, and that really is sort of our best and cleanest data that we get with Mary, who leads our digital team, who's here. On the other side of that, we have a ton of industry experts who have been doing it for 20 years, who are sort of leaning on their understanding of we tried that last year, we tried that 5 years ago, and here's how it sort of performed. And somewhere in the middle is sort of just our raw sales data. And so really, again, it's sort of this idea of blending all of that together and saying, okay, we have some very clear, hard data on this side that would paint a story, but probably not the complete story.
Right.
To your point, looking at maybe a return on ad spend and some of those sort of real deliberate metrics.
Yeah.
And on the other side, really having, all right, well, how did sales perform? How did we comp on this thing to last year? How do we think the messaging kind of landed now that we're kind of seeing it in real time? So it really is sort of a bit of a science meets art.
Got it.
Yeah, we're far from a well-oiled machine when it comes to data and KPIs.
Thought we were going to keep that.
Yeah, Zach and I were talking about this last night. We face a reality that maybe many people in this room do, which is that our data resides in a bunch of different places. We haven't stitched it together yet, so on and so forth. Maybe to a certain extent, this talk that I'm giving about brand is a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's sort of we're not capable of doing the other part. We're actively building those capabilities, and we realize that we absolutely have to have that much more marketing science driven approach, right, to the way that we're pulling our levers and kind of allocating our marketing portfolio. But I think it's very important for us to do this the right way. I mean, I think kind of, again, getting back to Brigitte's presentation, for us, it's really about getting back to the basics a little bit and looking at personalization, customer centricity through I think some core cornerstones of our brand, and making sure that we don't stray from those. And I think we do have a benefit, probably because we're a little bit underdeveloped in data science and marketing science. I think we have a great opportunity to do that the right way. And I don't think that's me, painting a rosy picture of an unrosy situation. I think it's actually a reality.
Okay, great. Anyone have a question from the audience? All right.
Does everyone know that Tommy Bahama has restaurants? I mean,
Yes, question over there. So for the people on the live stream, just so on mic, the question is around going back to the 80-20 split between wholesale, retail. How do you allocate resources to develop creative in a way that's going to land on that and build? So.
Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, the answer is.
All right, next question.
No, we as look, as our revenue pie has changed over the last decade. Where we may have been much more sort of creatively sourced on the wholesale side, that's the scales have definitely been tipped more to the direct-to-consumer side for some obvious reasons. I think one of the things, though, that we benefit from is, our creative is actually quite aligned across wholesale and DTC, and I think that our merchant organization has done a great job of not sort of bifurcating the message in the product. I mean, I think the messaging in the product that we carry DTC across wholesale is actually quite cohesive. We do benefit from that. But yes, I would say the creative allocation is definitely skewed toward DTC.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate it. And we're going to have to move on to the next session.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.